Hello and welcome to the keynote for the Americas region. We are, as I've said earlier, if you heard me in the previous session, on the home stretch, or pardon me, the last lap. We're not on the home stretch yet. That'll be maybe in a few hours. But we're in a good place. A lot of great sessions so far. This is a session I've been looking forward to. As you can see, it's going to be generative AI as a catalyst, which I'm sure should get your attention. I'm Jeff Rich, the Executive Director of IDSA, and it is my pleasure to be here to introduce our keynote speaker. Caleb Sima is someone you may know from some of the great work he's done at Capital One or Robinhood, but most of you probably know him from his highly published research with the esteemed Dr. Emmett Brown on the effects on identity of time travel. So I think he's going to be touching on that as well as we get through our session here. So with no further ado, please, Caleb, take it away.
Thank you, Jeff, for that fantastic introduction. I'm not sure if I'll be touching on time travel in this presentation, but maybe we'll discuss a little bit of it at the end. Thank you very much for that intro. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's get started. So one of the key points, obviously, of this presentation is about rethinking identity. It's called Identity Reboot. And the purpose is around generative AI as a catalyst for that reboot. So first, I want to give you a little bit of context of this presentation. I created this presentation because basically a couple friends and I were discussing sort of AI and some of the impacts that we're going to have from a society perspective on what it's going to cause. Specifically, when I say AI, I mean generative AI. And I am not an identity expert. In fact, I'm giving this keynote at an identity conference, which I'll be very honest with you guys is a bit stressful because I am not an identity expert. This presentation really came together because of this discussion. And I just randomly sort of wrote a blog on, hey, what is going to happen because of Gen AI and why is identity so critical because of Gen AI? And that ended up turning into the presentation that you're about to see. So my warning to you is I am not an identity expert. I do not live, breathe, and eat this like you guys do. And so as you go through, things that are obvious to you are probably not obvious to me. So the tone of this presentation will be my thinking and how I went through the process of thinking about identity, what should it look like, and how should it be built. All right, let's get started. So first of all, of course, identity is a massive, massive problem. In fact, when I started looking at the amount of companies that are focused on identity and solving identity or identity-based effects and impacts, there are over 500 companies in the identity space, which is absolutely incredible. Think about the multi-billions or not, if not trillions of dollars of market space that is all completely being spent and focused on the identity problem, which is really interesting because at the end of the day, even though we do this and we have 500 plus companies that are focused on this, to me, the user experience is absolutely still horrific. So why do we have so much money going into such a huge space, but yet I still have to go on websites and prove that I'm a human and start saying, oh, click this, this is a crosswalk, this is not a crosswalk, or type these sentences or solve this puzzle because I'm clearly a human and not a bot. Or I have to have 6-digit numbers that I've got to put in for multi-factor, or a password manager that I've got to deal with, or take photos of my driver's license, or prove liveness, or move my face around, or all of the crazy amount of things that I've got to be able to do in order to prove I am a human, in order to prove my identity. It's a horrific experience. So yet we've got all this money in here, and yet all of this experience is bad. And at the end of the day, what you end up having to do anyways is call support and give your verification through basically giving your birth date and probably maybe your social security number and your home address. And at the end of the day, it comes down to that, is sitting on support on a phone call and proving it through voice that this is who you are. So all of this stuff just stuffed onto this thing is horrific. And by the way, I just want to call out a couple examples that I had just while making this presentation. I'll give you a good one. So my wife unfortunately got really sick. And so I had to go to the pharmacy to go pick up her prescription. But in picking up her prescription, my insurance had something wrong. Her birth date was wrong on picking up, so they wouldn't give me the prescription. So I had to call my insurance, which my wife is a part of. And basically, the first thing is they authenticate me through effectively just a birth date and some other knowledge. And then I said, hey, I need to correct this because you guys have my wife's birth date incorrect. And they say, well, okay, well, we need your wife to authorize that. And I'm like, but she's on my insurance plan. I am the owner of the insurance. You just authenticated me. Just change it. No, I'm sorry, sir. She has to be the one that does this. And I'm like, okay, well, what does she need to do? She needs to get on the phone and say she authorizes it. And I'm like, okay, but she's sick and laying in bed and sleeping. I'm sorry. That's the only way to do it. So what do? I wake up my wife. I give her the phone. She goes, yes, this is her. Yes, authorize it. Hands the phone back to me. And then the customer support rep says, okay, great. Now we can change that bit of information. This is the state of the world that we're living in. So horrific experience. Obviously, this thing is terrible. Why? Why is there so much money being spent, but yet our experience is fundamentally horrific? And my belief is that it's because we have built everything on a broken foundation. This broken foundation is effectively a birth certificate given to an individual at birth that has no association to that individual and potentially a social security number. And by the way, when I say this is for the US only. This approach is just completely outdated, even for analog. It's built for an analog world. And not only that, it's built for a very small analog world. What we really need is a digital first foundation, something that is built for the digital world and works for that digital world. And the problem is this is a massive problem. We know that from a US government perspective, that it is so difficult, it will never change unless it's forced to. I mean, just look at how long it takes for us to fix a road. It will take 5 years and 60,000 different people to try to figure out how to fix a road. No way are we going to try to fix the foundations of the way that we've done identity, unless, of course, there's a forcing function. And in my mind, there's only two ways that forcing function happens. First, either a massive crisis occurs at which makes that forcing function occur, or two, in my belief, GenAI is that forcing function. So why? Well, when we look at GenAI, the thing that we start thinking about is what is real in GenAI. Today, we've got several different things that are happening. For example, I know today most of you, if you're not doing it today, you will be doing it tomorrow. When you write your emails, it is being rewritten by AI. When you take photos, it is being retouched by AI. When you are writing your documents, it is being rewritten by AI. You are augmenting almost everything you do through AI. Whether it is you get on a Zoom call and it pretties up the lighting and your face, everything we're doing is being augmented by AI. Also, when you start thinking about deepfakes, it's not just the things around when you look at everything in the news about a politician or about a crazy crisis or an event, you have to start questioning, is the video that you're seeing real? Is the photo that you're seeing not doctored or fake? How do you know that the video and the media at which you're seeing, or even the articles that are being written, are actually done by real, authentic people? And by the way, deepfakes don't just go to the negative, they also go to the positive. You've also got companies like HeyGen that are producing videos where you can create your own avatar of yourself, sending personalized video messages to everybody. It's a deep fake of you done for true business purposes. So then then you start moving into synthetic, which is today you may chat with your AI, but tomorrow you're going to be having a video conversation with your AI, talking to it just like a real person. And who knows when your AI bot starts talking to my AI bot to get things done. So how do you know when somebody is real, when someone's deep fake, when someone's augmented? In the future, everything will be this way. And this then creates real problems because when you start having the first court case of a video being submitted that is deep faked around a crime that occurs, things start having to be changed. How do we know what's real and what is not? And we have to have authenticity. And so as you start thinking in this world where everything is quote unquote fake, you have to know what is real. It's not enough to say this is bad. You have to know what is real. And in order to have authenticity, my belief is we have to have identity. Identity is the foundation of authenticity. So in order to know that this is real, I have to go backwards on that chain to say, well, where did it come from and who did it come from? And how do we have strong identity in order to have strong authenticity? And so I sat there, I said, well, you have to rethink identity. So what does it look like if you really go down to first principles of identity and think about this in a first principles way? And so that's what I did. And again, I'm not an identity expert, but I sat down and said, okay, let's really look at this from a first principles perspective, all the way from the beginning, and not think about what's been done today, but what needs to be done. And so I sat down, and I'm not kidding you. I basically drew out a piece of paper and I started drawing this out. So let me walk you through my mindset as I went through this process. So the first thing is you start thinking about, okay, well, the fundamentals is what is proof of person, right? What does truly proof of person mean? And what it is what is your uniqueness? There is something about every individual as a person that is truly unique. And so you start writing all of those down. And these are all going to be probably very familiar things. Is it your fingerprint that you have? Is it the way you type? Is it your voice? Is it your retina? Is it your DNA? And you start going through these things and you start thinking about this and saying, well, what is truly proof of person? And so, let me give you some examples of how I thought about it. Let's take typing as an example. All right, so typing. Many people have started to say typing is truly unique. You can identify a person by how they type. And actually, this is quite true. When you do some research, hey, it's got very, very high uniqueness to an individual on how they type. But then I was like, well, that's true. But if I go and play sports and then I jam my finger, then the way I type changes completely. So then how reliable is typing in order to prove identity? And it's not very reliable. And then you start thinking about, well, does that mean every time I log into my machine, I need to type something or log into a website and type a sentence? I'm like, that's pretty high friction. And so the friction of this is pretty high. Like that is not very good. And then you also start thinking about, well, if someone were to pop my machine and own it with malware, like how difficult would it be for them to capture the typing and to replicate that typing and steal it? Like that's not very hard either. So then typing becomes not a very good factor for proving uniqueness. So then you go in the opposite end of the spectrum and you start thinking about things like DNA. DNA is highly unique. In fact, it is the most unique thing at which you can get out of an individual. But it's also highly reliable, right? Like DNA will not change. Although when you look at something, let's say like a retina, there are people who don't have eyes. And so retina may not be as reliable, but it is unique. DNA is very unique. So then you start coming up with these factors. And so I created, by the way, a very horrible grid. I apologize for this, but to try to look at, is it unique? What's the level of friction for using it? How reliable is it? And can it be stolen? And so these factors I started thinking about. And it's interesting because when it comes down to it, you start seeing why Face ID is so useful today and why it's being used everywhere. Because when you look at Face ID, it is fairly unique. Like it's not 100% unique, but when you look at the actual uniqueness of someone's face, it's hard to replicate. It's generally fairly hard to replicate. It's fairly unique. The error margin is not that bad. It's also extremely low friction. You can do it in a crowd from just a photo, or you can just do it walking down a hallway. And so it's very, very low friction. It's also quite reliable. Almost everybody has a face, although you can cover that face. When it comes to identity, it becomes fairly highly reliable as well. So you can start seeing like face mitts in the medium of all of these things. So you start seeing, oh, this is why people are using it for uniqueness. Now, as I was going through this, the one thing that I noticed right away, which is, hey, proof of person is really important, but you need to be able to have proof of person or uniqueness on people who are not alive. Like someone who is dead clearly needs identity. They need a proof of person, a uniqueness. And so it immediately said, oh, wait a minute, things like voice, typing, and gait has to be completely eradicated. But if proof of person requires someone dead to be identified, then why are we using things like voice, gait, or typing to do things like authentication? And then this thing, and I know that to you guys it's going to sound obvious, but to me was not obvious, which is, hey, actually, in order to authenticate, you must be alive. And so authentication is a process separated from identity. Identity is a thing that needs to be applied, but authentication is a process. And for some reason, I keep mixing these two together. And so once I separated that out, I realized that, hey, proof of identity or true identity is actually not necessary in order to be alive or not. You have to have it to be alive or not. But in order to authenticate, you must be alive. And so then that added another layer, which is proof of life. You have to have proof of life in order to authenticate, but it's not necessarily proof of person. And so when you think about proof of life, obviously, how do you prove that you're alive? And this is pretty fascinating as well, which is the way you do this today is movement, perhaps touch of a YubiKey, perhaps heat sensing, all of these different things to be proof of life. And when I got to this, by the way, if any of you have ever seen the movie Minority Report, this is so important because in Minority Report, there's a scene where, if you remember, he has everything is done by Retina ID. And so he goes and gets an underground surgery done to replace his eyes. And he carries his old eyes and he goes to the old building, sticks the eyeballs to the sensor for the retina, and it unlocks it. Which, by the way, shows two things in this. First and foremost, proof of life was not done on that sensor because otherwise just holding an eyeball wasn't going to work. And two, just as we know, if you're a CISO or an IT, bad offboarding for that company because clearly that person was fired and yet they did not offboard their authentication. But good sense of proof of life, right? Which is this is necessary to have. And then on top of that proof of life, you've also then, I think, have identity. And so this is what I originally really thought of as identity, which is a label. It's really an attribute, which is my birth certificate, my passport, my license, my state ID. These are all just, human forms of representing my identity, but can be very, very different. I can have a different identity in a different country, different passports, different licenses, and different names. I can change my name at any time. It is the domain name representation of my IP address as an identity. This can be changed. And so really identity as we see it is very, very specific and narrowed into its roles and into its profiles. These are the things that I think of identity normally. And on top of that label, you've also got proof of intent, which is, we've all heard, it's what you have and what you know. So I'm going to say something a little bit controversial here, which is I posit that proof of intent or what you know is only proof of intent. A password is only something to say, are you under duress? Today, passwords are used as a secret to show identity. But if you had true identity, if you have proof of person, if you have proof of life, if you have the identity as a label, then passwords, what are passwords good for? And to me, they're only there to say, I will allow you, I am proving that I am not under duress and I am giving a password, something only I know, in order to do it. Or secondary, it is a proxy of trust, which is, if I tell someone my password is the only thing that I know, and that person then proxies that trust to an individual, they then know that there is a proxy of identity done through that individual. That, I think, is the only reason passwords, or what exist. Let me give you an example, by the way, of why this is obviously important. Uh, Today, there happens to be a big scam going on at certain, let's call shady bars and clubs, where what's happening is people who are going to these bars, they're grabbing a drink and their drinks are getting drugged. And what these people are experiencing is they go to a bar, they grab a drink, and then they wake up outside in the parking lot and their phone is gone and their accounts are emptied. Their checking accounts are emptied. All their funds have been transferred out. And they're like, what happened? And what's happening is the scam is going on where they're drunk, their drinks are getting drugged. And then what's happening is the people are taking their phones while they're passed out and they're using Face ID. They're taking Face ID, they're unlocking their phone. And many of you probably have the similarly. Then they go to Venmo, they go to their banking account apps, and they use Face ID to authenticate, and then they're transferring the funds out. And this is now a big thing that's happening as a scam going through these areas. So this is a great example of where, even though proof of person was true, it was that individual. They were unique. They were alive, right? It was their right identity. It was something that they had, but was it the password that they gave? Was the intent there for them to transfer their funds out? And it wasn't. And so this is another great example of why proof of intent, I personally believe passwords are representing proof of intent, and why that is important in authentication as a process. So here's the most important part about all of this. In these layers, as I've started building them, I was like, these are really important layers, but at the end of the day, the thing that matters the most is the ties between the layers. You must have strong ties between each and every layer. That's the bond that matters. For example, if we were issued a birth certificate at birth, but it had, let's say, a QR code of our DNA signature on that birth certificate, that's a strong example of a bond of a birth certificate of paper to the actual proof of person uniqueness that it contained. This bond is what really matters. This shows that I can't just go get a copy of my birth certificate with a driver's license. It has to prove that I can then match my DNA. It is you, here is your certificate. And I think those bonds, as you go through each of those layers, is the true thing that matters. And of course, at the end of the day, authentication must be continuous. How do you do this so that you can not just do this in a one-time process, but do this consistently over and over and over again in a low friction way? That is a huge challenge. So I've got a fun story about this. During this time, I got an Apple Vision Pro, which, by the way, I find awesome. So you put on these goggles, you go into this AR, VR world, and you do this. You go and you watch movies, you go and do your work. Apple created this thing called Optic ID, which makes a lot of sense. It's not Face ID because you can't see the face, you can only see the retinas. In Optic ID, what was fantastic is when you look at the measurements, number one, Optic ID retina, is it a good measurement of proof of person uniqueness? Yes, it absolutely is. Two, can it be proof of life? Absolutely. It is now looking at eyeballs that are moving, that have areas that you can detect it as proof of life. Three, is it low friction? In fact, it is the most low friction. When you put this thing on, you don't have to do anything. It automatically scans your retina, moves on, and by the way, could be doing it continuously. As I'm watching movies, as I'm interacting, it could continuously always be authenticating my retina. And fifth, this is a little bit of a challenge, but could it be proof of intent? Is there a way at which, if you're looking at your retinas, you can see, am I under duress or am I not under duress? Is a really fantastic question to ask. But when you look at Optic ID in this new world of VR and AR, Optic ID and using your retinas to check these boxes. And by the way, all of them have strong bonds in between it. The proof of person, the proof of life, the low friction. All of these are very strong bonds, all done in one single scan. This is a very, very interesting model of where I thought, wow, this is, as I go into this world, I'm automatically and continuously being authenticated. This is an interesting solution to the problem. So, of course, everyone's going to say, Caleb, what about privacy? This, like everyone I talk to about this is like, yeah, but the government's going to track me. Like, this is terrible for privacy. And my posit is that is the exact opposite of that, which is you can break the paradox, which is stronger identity, especially one made for the digital world, will reinforce privacy. It can allow you to share only the things you need. Like today, what we're doing is I'm giving all of these factors, my address, my social security number, where I live, my age, all of these things all have to be given at once in order for these little factors to say, oh yeah, this is Caleb and I agree, versus a very strong bonded thing that says, this is my ID. It has been signed by the government. This is who I am. That's all you need to know. And that is where we want to get to. And the only way to get there is by going through fundamentally rethinking, I think, the principles of identity and doing it for the digital age. And so like this, I believe, is a very strong thing that's going to occur. Privacy actually makes our privacy better and stronger. So where do we go from here? So first of all, I'm not going to talk about what the solutions are because I don't know what the solutions are. But what I do know in thinking through this process is the problems to solve. And the problems to solve is you need to strongly tie proof of person from birth, that really, or from point of origin. And, there's other ways to think about this, but that's the way that we need to do this. We have to build strong bonds between the layers. Actually, if I were to build a startup company, I've always said, I would want to figure out how to do strong bonds between the layers that exist today. Third, chain of custody from origin of proof of person to prove authenticity. So say that, hey, what you've now created can now automatically go back to what your identity is. And then finally, fourth, once this system works from individuals, how do you carry it to companies? And then how do you carry it to systems? And so finally, this is also going to be super controversial, which I love it. Here's my prediction. My prediction is if we can actually get to a point of creating an identity for a digital world, that there will be a separation of legacy internet that we know of today and clean internet of tomorrow. I want you to think about this. If I can truly have a real digital identity that's strong at its foundations, then if I'm a bank or someone that does retail, why in the world would I suffer with the internet of today, where I've got to deal with anonymous attacks, I've got to deal with security, I've got to deal with non-accountability, versus having a clean internet where I can service this that says, as soon as you connect to that internet, you're starting from a digital identity where then that consumer can go directly to my services without ever having to log in, without ever having to prove their identity, without ever having to do anything. They go to our website, they're immediately in their account, they can do transfers, they can view the information they need. This would eliminate a massive amount of headache that I would need to do from a security perspective by having that version of the internet, a place where you will go and interact and transact in a way where your identity is first. That is going to be a very interesting world. My prediction is if we get there, that's where you'll see things break. Finally, I thought I would end with a very positive sort of identity quote for everybody, which is always be a first-rate version of yourself instead of a second-rate version of somebody else. And that's it. Thank you.
Caleb, I want to thank you very much. That was fantastic. I mean, a lot of great outcomes that I think you're recommending are going to happen and your predictions. I think I heard in there something about you started launching a startup.
I said, if you were to build a startup, my go focus on how do you build strong bonds between these layers? Because
and
that
I
to
think
me
you
is
know where I was going with that, but thank you. Well done regardless. Thank you very much. Great way to really kick off where we're going with the Americas region. And now I know we have another great session coming up. Caleb, you can see he put in there how you could find him. That's one of his identities. Thank you again, Caleb, very much. Great session. Great to have you here.